Žavingi ir gundantis gražuolių atvaizdai. Baugios ir juokingos pamėklių istorijos. Nuožmus ir narsus samurajų žygdarbiai. Istorinė panoraminė paroda Japonijos popkultūros tradicija nuo Edo laikotarpio ukijoje iki 20-21 amžiaus mangos, anime ir superfratų. Nacionalinė dailės galerija iki spalio 13 dienos. Rėmėjai, informaciniai partneriai.
Now it's my immense pleasure to present to you Dr. Raphael Koenig, or Raphael Koenig, because he is French, n'est-ce pas? Who is a graduate of Sorbonne and Harvard, and now happens to be associate professor in University of Connecticut. He has held Leonard Lauder Fellowship in Modern Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2019 and 20, and received his PhD in comparative literature, as I said already, from Harvard University in 2018. Dr. Koenig's research focuses on the interplay between mental health and artistic production, especially with regard to the reception history of works produced by psychiatric institutions in France and Germany. His recent publications include Portal's The Visionary Architecture of Paul Gurch, Yale University Press, co-authored with Robert Wiesenberger, and the edited volume of Art Brut, an unclassifiable object ? So unique expertise, deep perspective. We are very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Dr. Koenig. Je vous en prie.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, and I would like to thank Dr. Arias Gelunas, who just spoke, Dr. Lolita Jablonskine, and the whole team of the Lithuanian National Gallery of Art for this kind invitation and for putting together such a fantastic exhibition. I am particularly excited about the fact that this exhibition presents the work of Yuichiro Ukai in an especially illuminating context, as an example of the continued vitality of Japanese popular culture informing kind of higher strata of culture. It speaks to the dialogue between different registers of culture, from mass media to more rarefied spheres of cultural production, as well as to the existence of crucial through lines between early form of mechanical reproduction of images in the Edo era, so like kind of early printing methods of the ukiyo-e, for instance, and the present moment of digital reproducibility. And I will attempt to show why Ukai's work is so relevant to think about these different contexts today. Yuichiro Ukai is a prodigy of the Japanese art world. He's only 29. He's entirely self-taught, and as the sheltered workshop where he operates, which is called Atelier Yamanami, Yamanami Kobo in Japanese, in Shiga Prefecture near Kyoto, Japan, offers support and art materials for people with mental disabilities, but no formal artistic training. So he didn't go through art school or any form of training. At just 29 years old, Ukai has now been featured in the New York Times on 2 occasions and exhibited internationally. So this would arguably make a lot of more formally trained contemporary artists extremely jealous. And I should add that his proper artistic career only began in 2014 when he joined Atelier Yamanami. That has been in existence, the atelier has been around since 1986. He's a very young artist whose work has been rapidly evolving, and I think we can expect many more surprises from Ukai in the coming years, and it feels like a very special privilege to be able to talk about this topic with you today. I would like to preface my talk by thanking the other people and institutions who have played a role in promoting the work of Yuichiro Ukai and have provided it with the visibility and recognition it deserved leading up to today's exhibition at the Lithuanian National Gallery of Art. I would like to acknowledge especially the American Folk Art Museum, who integrated a work by Yuichiro Ukai in their collection, the Outsider Art Fair in New York, and Gallery Christian Burst in Paris. I would also like to thank gallerist and curator Yuichiro Ukai, one of the world's leading specialists of art produced by people with disabilities in Japan, for her support. My research on Ukai has been funded by the Harvard Asia Center, and I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the support received from its former director, Professor Karen Thornber. I would also like to thank my co-researcher, Benny Schaffer. We spent several weeks together doing fieldwork at Atelier Manami in Kansai in July 2018. That resulted in a co-curated exhibition at Harvard University in 2019. So that's the documentation from the 2019 exhibition at the Harvard Asia Center that was presenting several works from Atelier Manami, including Yuichiro Ukai. And last but not least, I would also like to thank Masato Yamashita, the director of Atelier Manami, the amazing staff and artists of this institution, including, of course, Yuichiro Ukai, who allowed us to observe their working processes in the workshops. The artists and staff of Yamanami really went out of their way to help us, while themselves being really busy doing incredibly demanding work, and that very generously kind of welcomed us into their lives. Yuichiro Ukai is a relative newcomer at Atelier Yamanami. As I said, he was born in 1985, and he started his artistic career in 2014. In the space of only a few years, his style has undergone dramatic changes, and his rise to the very top of the international art world has been nothing short of meteoric. So just presenting like the process of following kind of Yuichiro Ukai in his work. That included him kind of working at his studio, at his desk, but also working kind of outdoors on the walls of his studio. So we also kind of had film documentation of like trying to register his kind of working process. And his it's not easy because he's a very kind of restless artist. So he loves to kind of change surfaces, go outdoors, go back into the studio. So it's very kind of demanding, basically. You just have to kind of run after him while he's in his painting kind of frenzy. Some of the world's most influential journalists have pored over Yuichiro Ukai's intricate compositions. Their verdict was unanimous, an enthusiastic reception coupled with an overwhelming sense of disorientation. So some of the expressions that have been used to talk about Ukai's work, so just trying to find a picture that embodies the disorientation. It's when the work was first presented in New York at the Outsider Art Fair. So, quote, explosive control, end quote, detonations of details. So like the notion of an explosion, having the potential to overload and saturate the critic's eyeballs, said the New York Times art critic Holland Cotter in 2019, possibly hinting at André Breton's explosante fixe. And he was actually talking about this work. So I'm just giving you a very small detail of a work called Obake. There's actually another panel from the same work that's visible downstairs in the exhibition. And even in just a few square inches of this monumental work, you can understand the notion of overload, the notion of explosion of details, the notion of having a lot to look at and not knowing where to look, basically. The following year, his colleague Will Heinrich echoed this notion of disorientation and boundless profusion. I quote, "Everyone is moving in Yuichiro Ukai's crowd scene, but good luck ever noticing more than a fraction of it." So basically, getting professional art critics to really kind of question their methodologies and scratching their heads about how to kind of deal with this kind of overloading of visual sensations. Heinrich also attributed such relative disorientation to Ukai's mixing of iconographies taken from very different cultural and chronological strata. So you can see characters from Edo-era ukiyo-e prints, or from slightly earlier Nanban paintings, mingling with Japanese cartoon characters from contemporary anime culture, and even more incongruously with large herds of dinosaurs. So you have dinosaurs, Edo-era, modern contemporary anime, all kind of fused together into this work. And the goal of this talk will not be to dismiss the experiences of confusion and disorientation that are a fundamental dimension of the reception of Ukai's work. It seems to be linked to their appeal and expressive powers. I think they also worked in this way in this exhibition. I could see a lot of people drawn to them, but also kind of really puzzled by them. Rather, I would try to offer a roadmap for viewers who might attempt to navigate through this tangle of lines, colors, and disjointed characters. And without risking to break the spell, it seems entirely possible to kind of chip away at the aura of mystery that still surrounds them by delving successively into their context of production, iconography, and compositional principles. So I will start with the kind of general context of production of the work that I kind of titled The Singular and the Collective. And of course, like, the work itself is very unique, puzzling, extraordinary, but it's important to remember that they're part of a collective, they're part of a context. They're not just some kind of spontaneous emergence. So in spite of their kind of one-of-a-kind appearance that seems to disrupt conventions of artistic creation and viewership, Ukai's visual productions are the result of a complex tangle of concrete relationships and practices. They are both highly singular and rooted in a collective. As a preamble to a formal analysis of a work, it seems necessary to first describe its context and conditions of production, as they might not be immediately apparent in a museum or art gallery context. And we might want to start with the most concrete of questions. What does a day in the working life of Yuichiro Ukai look like? So just to give you a sense of the context, this is where he works. So that's the inner courtyard of the kind of Yamanami studio with lots of different workshops for people to kind of work in different media, a fleet of minibuses to bring people in and out of the workshop, and a bench in the middle that Yuichiro Ukai kind of appropriated for his art. So he just kind of spontaneously decided to do some kind of graffiti, basically, I mean, with painting medium on the bench that kind of became part of Ukai's work, basically. So there's no clear boundaries on where the work would stop. Let me start by describing this setting. So it's a series of low buildings surrounding a vast central courtyard on the top of a hill, overlooking the quiet landscape of rural Kansai. So it's really in the middle of the fields of rice paddies. These buildings belong to Atelier Yamanami, which was founded in 1986 to host people with mental disabilities, improve their quality of life, and provide a framework for them to express themselves artistically. While its size is exceptional, with 88 people working there, it is by no means an isolated case. So just to give you a sense of the atmosphere inside some of these buildings, so there's a lot of people working there, and you can see that they're in kind of close quarters, in close proximity to each other, but working in very different styles. So that's also another thing to take into account, the collective dimension and then the singularity of each individual expression. You can't really find a Yamanami school or a common style that was developed even in this very close proximity of people working literally inches from each other. And Atelier Yamanami is part of a dense local network of institutions, which also comprises atelier corners in Osaka, the Mizonuki and Dandelion workshop, also in the Kansai region. The common goal of these institutions is to improve the living conditions and facilitate the artistic expression of people with mental disabilities. More broadly, they also use this art to fight pervasive prejudice and discrimination and foster a broader acceptance of people with disabilities within society. So it's a dual mission: improve the living standards, the living conditions of the people working inside the workshop, so some kind of care mission, and kind of outwards mission of activism to basically inform broader society, remove stigma from mental conditions, and make sure that people see the potential creativity and richness of people with different kind of mental conditions who might be described as neurodivergent, for instance. Atelier Yamanami is a very kind of well-oiled organization, and so there are, as I said, more than 80 clients working at Yamanami. As a sign of respect, as is often the case in such institutions, people with disabilities working at the atelier are referred to as clients, not patients. Ukai starts his day early in the morning, greeted by the institution's director and staff. Clients then scatter into various studios devoted to drawing, painting, embroidery, sculpture. Ukai shares his own studio space, as is shown here, as a typical studio space at Yamanami, with a few artists. Lunch is taken at the atelier's canteen, and clients leave again in the middle of the afternoon, boarding a fleet of minivans sporting the logo of the Nippon Foundation, which is the big NGO that is kind of financing the whole thing. This studio work, which is now the core of the atelier's mission, is not to be confused with studio courses or an art therapy program, for instance. In fact, staff members offer encouragement, provide a safe and supportive environment, and make sure that their clients are properly supplied with art materials, but as a rule, they make a point not to intervene in the work of their clients. So they do not offer directions, instructions, or practical exercises. Clients first develop their own artistic practices, techniques, and visual vocabularies at their own pace, often over the course of many years. In that sense, even though the term is itself not entirely unproblematic, as we'll discuss later, Ukai could be qualified as self-taught in as much as, like nearly all the members of Atelier Yamanami, he did not receive formal artistic training. And Atelier Yamanami should be situated in the broader context of a long history of care institutions and art workshops for people with disabilities in Japan. It's a fascinating and yet understudied topic. In the first half of the 20th century, artists and writers in Japan showed interest in the works produced in psychiatric contexts. Among many such examples, this interest for written and visual works produced in psychiatric contexts is particularly relevant to the kind of fantastic Japanese modernist novel Dogura Magura by the writer Yumeno Kyusaku, written in 1935. I'm lucky that there's a French translation of this novel. There's actually no English translation as of yet, which is entirely set in a psychiatric hospital. After the Second World War, this kind of cultural interest took the shape of a creation of new institutions. So a new kind of institution was created. Educator and activist Kazuo Itoga founded Omigakuen in Shiga Prefecture. So it all happens in Shiga Prefecture, like in this specific corner of Kansai, in 1946 as a care facility for children with disabilities, a number of whom were war orphans. So kind of big creation in 1946. And they were encouraged to create clay sculptures with the help of avant-garde ceramicist Kazuo Yagi. So really interesting kind of early example of avant-garde artists working directly with people with disabilities in the immediate post-war period. From the 1970s onwards, a number of new workshops were created following the lead of Yasuo Harima's Tanpopo no Ie, so Dandelion House, founded in 1973, which was devoted to teenagers with disabilities. And Atelier Yamanami is premised upon a similar model. Its founder, Katsuya Yamashita, envisioned it as a complement of Tanpopo no Ie. So basically, Tanpopo no Ie does teenager with disabilities, and Yamanami Kobo, Atelier Yamanami, founded in 1986, does adults with disabilities, so just catering for like the next step in life. And Harima's Tanpopo no Ie is a paradigmatic example of a new kind of activism in Japan. From the first half of the 1970s onwards, a number of people had been involved, who had been previously involved with radical protest groups and movements, elaborated a new doctrine of social activism known as networking theory. So what does the networking theory involve? It's not networking as you go around the room and shake people's hands. It's just linking together lots of different initiatives. So instead of a type of revolutionary confrontation with power structures, they limited their ambitions to sectional struggles designed to yield more concrete results. So for instance, a group would work on reducing environmental pollution, advocating for the rights of specific social or minority groups. And the idea is that all of these initiatives would have a kind of snowballing effect, would be networked together, progressively reaching a critical mass that would have a more fundamental effect on the whole of society. So sectional initiatives, sectional types of activism, and it's very much what we see at Atelier Manami. So Ukai's creative process unfolds in a paradoxical kind of in-between space between collective organization and individual creation. The fact that his work is in dialogue with a range of pre-existing visual traditions and iconographies from ukiyo-e to anime constitutes an obvious counter-argument to the notion that he would be completely isolated. We might even say that the fact that his work is so deeply informed by these various strands of visual culture should encourage us to take the notion of self-taught itself with a grain of salt. Moreover, being part of a collective structure is a key feature to understand Ukai's work. As I said, artists working in the space might work in very different styles, but we have to take into account their context of production that becomes the condition of possibility for Ukai's work. And describing the history and inner workings of the atelier constitutes a crucial preamble to an analysis of Ukai's techniques, iconography, and visual vocabularies, which I will now discuss. So upon arriving at Atelier Manami in 2014, Ukai started by making relatively small format works, so approximately 5 by 8 inches, with colored pencils. So that's an early Ukai. You can see that it's still relatively simple in its organization, but you can see some of the kind of organizational premises of later works. And he was using wrapping straw paper, that is to say paper that is usually used for wrapping rather than drawing or painting, which he obtained from the work therapy workshop next door. So even though he occasionally draws on white copy paper, this straw paper that is called in Japanese bafunshi, or very poetically horse manure paper, so it's called horse shit paper if you want, has remained Yuichiro Ukai's medium of choice, including for the larger format works for the second half of the 2010s that are frequently exhibited internationally. And it is fair to assume that while his discovery of his straw paper might have been an accident, the fact that he kept using it throughout his career is an absolutely kind of deliberate choice. And I also mentioned that in the catalog essay that I believe is partly accessible through QR code in the exhibition. So when it was founded, Atelier Manami was dedicated to work therapy. It was employing people with disabilities to do manual labor in a supportive environment. And art production progressively took center stage. So the fact that this kind of underlying layer is still present in the work of Ukai testifies to the kind of broader history of Atelier Manami. Ukai's works from 2014 might have a more limited iconographic range, but their compositional principles are already very distinctive. While some of his early drawings still abide by traditional compositional principles, he soon designed kind of larger, proliferating compositions that spilled over the boundaries of a paper. So you can see that he's kind of coming into his own, increasingly disregarding notions such as framing or the distinction between center and margin. So there's no clear center of the composition, there are no margins. He's like using increasingly unconventional, let's say, compositional principles. From 2015-2016 onwards, Ukai further elaborated on these compositional principles, followed by creating works in larger formats, often consisting in large, proliferating accumulations of herds of dinosaurs. 2017 marked a radical shift in his production, heralding a period of increased stability and artistic maturity. Ukai started working on even larger pieces, creating triptychs, of 21 by 30 inches. So this is a kind of incredible composition. There's a very similar composition actually exhibited kind of downstairs. This is Ukai's kind of mature style, basically, also with kind of striking compositional principles that completely disregard notions of center and periphery, or like classical kind of centering of a subject. He kind of progressively incorporated more and more kind of elements. So we mentioned the ukiyo-e, the nanban, also elements from his daily life started appearing in the composition. So if you look closely, behind the dinosaurs, the ukiyo-e characters, the manga characters, the yokai, you'll also find his bed, or his TV, for instance. So he's also adding kind of more kind of banal elements of his daily life kind of thrown into the mix that look even more surreal because of what they're surrounded by, basically. Ukai's largest composition to date it would have to be called an enneaptic, because there are 9 sheets in total. And if you look closely at the kind of joining of the sheets, you can see that they're all connected together, which is quite an impressive feat, because he doesn't actually have the space to create this. He doesn't have a large studio space to work in this type of format. He's doing the sheets one by one. But if you look at, if we zoom into kind of the joining of his sheets, you can see that the characters are perfectly joined. So you can follow the characters through each sheet. So it's also like an incredible work of kind of joining the details, of following up this enormous kind of sprawling composition. And another kind of important part of Ukai's work is the fact that he's using, as I mentioned, not just kind of these sheets of paper, but also kind of rough wooden surfaces that are outside of his studio. So if you thought that this was too much to keep track of and work on, you have to imagine that he might be working on all of those at once, plus all the walls of his studio. So that's 13 different panels, 13 different surfaces. He might add in the bench, so that would be 15. And he's really kind of gravitating between all of his surfaces at once. Like we have to think that this is actually one composition that's always kind of evolving. We tried to document this composition as well as we could, because basically it's always evolving. So the state that I'm showing you now is from 2019, but it must have completely changed already by now. He keeps adding elements, retracting some of them. And you can see this kind of incredible mixing of elements from manga, anime, ukiyo-e. And just to throw in a few definitions on the types of visual cultures that Yuichiro Ukai is using, but you can also see downstairs in the exhibition. He has been using elements of nanban art. So that refers to 16th and 17th century works of art, often consisting in lacquered folding screens or byubu, depicting the arrival of Portuguese traders, also called as southern barbarians, and missionaries to Japan, and ukiyo-e prints that are a genre of mass-produced woodblock prints that Dr. Galunas already talked about at length. For any further questions on these techniques, I would refer you to Dr. Galunas, who is much more of an expert than I am on these questions. But I think it's important to notice that the work of Ukai is more than the sum total of these discrete elements. The near absence of contextual elements highlights the unlikely and incongruous nature of these associations. While he appears to be mostly drawing his dinosaurs from memory, he's consistently using reference materials for the other iconographic quotations that appear in his works, for anime characters, ukiyo-e, or nanban art, and he tends to keep these materials in the immediate vicinity of his workspace. So if we want to have a visual proof of the influence of ukiyo-e on Ukai, we can see that he's actually using this book of ukiyo-e literally on his desk while he's working. So there's ukiyo-e on one side, and then a kind of reference book about Anpaman on the other. So you can really see the kind of Ukai working process in motion. Not all quotations are faithful renderings of these respective original images, so it's not really a collage of quotations, but they seem to involve a larger degree of creative license. Methodologically, if we should endeavor to offer a closed reading analysis of a representative work by Ukai, it would thus be necessary to first consult the source materials that he himself has been using. By cross-referencing each individual character, it is possible to gather information such as the degree to which each formal quotation is modified to fit into the composition, or a statistical overview of the artists and visual traditions involved. So just to give you a sense of what Yuichiro Ukai's reference library might be, we see it on his desk. So here are some of the volumes that he's using. And I actually put together a kind of bibliographical list. And it is possible to actually follow. So if one, I mean, it's painstaking work, but it's possible to kind of trace back these characters in Ukai's work to these publications. So the one that we just saw on his desk is actually the second one on the list, Kuniyoshi and Kunisada. So that's one that is in the middle here, and that he's looking at here, which is actually a publication from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And the Anpaman Super Big Illustrated Reference Book, the Super Daizukan, that he's using a lot, actually. You can even see it from the state of like the copy that he's using. So we can ascertain that most anime characters come from this Anpaman reference book. It is also possible to find other influences on Yuichiro Ukai. For instance, Kuniyoshi Utagawa and Kunisada Utagawa. The former is famous for his portraits of kabuki actors, while the latter specializes in depictions of warriors and traditional monsters. The last of these categories, so the yokai, appears a lot in Ukai's work. The most meaningful source for the yokai is actually from Hiroshige Utagawa, as well as the illustrated night parade of 100 demons, Gazu Hyaki Yagio, by Toriyama Sekien. So that's actually one of the main sources for Yuichiro Ukai's compositions. And I would like to particularly insist on this point, so it's just some examples from Sekien's work, because I think I was able to understand better on the basis of discussions with Dr. Gelunas and through the inclusion of Ukai's work in the present exhibition, that there are in fact two ways of looking at the temporal disparities and anachronisms in Ukai's paintings, as a clashing of different time periods from prehistory to modern times, or as the manifestation of a red thread uniting Japanese visual cultures across the Meiji-era divide, manifesting what Dr. Gelunas called Edo nostalgia. The very concrete link in Ukai's case between Edo era and 20th and 21st century visual cultures would be his extensive use of purely visual encyclopedias and catalogs of various kinds, illustrating various, in an encyclopedic manner, illustrating various things, objects, beings as a popular medium. So this was a popular genre in the Edo period, like a visual dictionary of the world, of all things, basically. It's a very ambitious notion, but it was actually something that was printed at length, illustrated by artists such as Hiroshige, with several volumes covering ways of depicting any type of object, from people to flowers, stones, minerals, buildings, and stars. And I already mentioned that Ukai is working on ghost encyclopedias as well, but they're already kind of encyclopedic in the way they're built. And the Anbaman Daizukan, or reference book, which is an important creative tool for Ukai, could be described as direct descendant of this type of Edo-era compendium or visual encyclopedia. It's the same organizational principle. And for the composition, it is worth noting that Ukai's quotations remain limited to individual iconographic elements. The way these elements are combined together in a new composition seems entirely different from modes of representation typically associated with ukiyo-e or even anime. So we could just do a comparison, a very quick comparison, between Kuniyoshi Utagawa and his origin story of a cat stone at Okabe, which is from the MFA catalog owned by Ukai. So if we look at this, we can see that there's two types of centering, right? There's like this kind of giant, terrifying cat in the middle that is centered on the center panel and kind of spread across all three panels. And then each panel is recentered on a character. So you have like the central focus of a triptych, which is the cat, and then each panel has its own point of focus, which is an individual character. So if we keep that type of composition in mind that actually Ukai borrowed from, he actually used the cat element in some of his compositions, and we look at a Ukai triptych, we can really ask, okay, well, where is the center? Where are the discrete elements that are foregrounded by this composition? Like, there are none, right? So he's really using iconographic elements from these traditions, but he's recomposing them in a way that is entirely his own, right? And I would say that the way this composition is structured is through a kind of intricate network of dynamic lines, which are occasionally made more apparent by motifs that make these lines visible. So for instance, it could be ropes, snakes, or tentacles from octopi. So this kind of sprawling effect of a composition is sometimes visualized by compositional elements. And his earlier work, Trains, from 2017, that we're very lucky to have in the exhibition here, just downstairs, I would say kind of embodies this type of compositional principle, because the composition fundamentally entirely consists of a dense network of trains running through the image in all directions and seemingly at full speed, right? So I would say that this work is maybe a really good way of kind of understanding how the Ukai like visual compositions are built, right? What makes them tick. And these compositional principles partly account for the strong visual impact of Ukai's works on the viewer, drawing them in while also saturating and disorienting their visual fields with an explosion of dynamic vectors. So it's like a vectorial painting. Ukai, as I mentioned, works on as many as 13 different surfaces at once, but I would argue that these dynamic vectors, this overall composition, is always present as he's kind of working on these compositional elements. And more generally, the notion of serialized rhythmical composition of individual elements seems key to understand Ukai's creative process. Another element that is worthy of attention and has received some critical attention to date is Ukai's sound poetry. So it's written entirely on iPad, and it constitutes a kind of mantra, creating dynamic patterns with a repetition of the names of individual anime characters. So it's a side creation to his visual work. Actually, his sound poetry repeating anime characters. And on this question, I actually invited Professor Andrew Campana from Cornell University, who works on Japanese popular culture, to work specifically on this list because he understands what all these references are. So this is a slide that was put together by Professor Campana based on Yuichiro Ukai sound poem. I'll just try to do the first 8 lines, but I think you'll understand like the kind of absolute saturation of the image, right? So so we start with dandan niban. Okay, so dandan niban, tubozu niban, goro goro, mogurin, baikin kumomeka, baikin bidaman, manpan manban, Shukupan manban, Baikin UFO, Dokin UFO, there's a lot of UFOs, Kokin UFO, Kechutachi, Heitaitachi, And that's just for the first 8 lines, right? So it really, you can understand that this sense of saturation, of imagery, of allusions runs through his sound poem, because it's sound poetry. They don't really, there's no verbal structure most of the time to unite these characters. And it's also kind of a key element to his creations. And I'm now coming to the conclusion. To quote the famous opening lines of Renaissance British poet John Donne, Meditation 17, no man is an island entirely of itself. So no one is an island, no one is cut off from the rest, right? So while undoubtedly one of a kind, Yuichiro Ukai's intriguing, even puzzling visual compositions are themselves caught in a tangled web of concrete relationships, artistic and social practices, historical processes, and iconographic vocabularies. In this case, Ukai is also the result of a series of striking continuities and through lines in Japanese visual culture, uniting high culture and mass culture, pre-Meiji Edo-era modernity, and 20th and 21st century anime. And a kind of incredible anecdote that I just learned about this morning from Yuichiro Ukai is that Ukai is actually a direct descendant of another Ukai who was kind of leading character of a ninja clan that helped Tokugawa Ieyasu come into power. So somehow in his family history, there's someone who helped the first shogun get to power and actually create the whole Edo era thing. So it's kind of incredible that he's now also a poster boy for this Edo nostalgia in a way. I would say that not just Yuichiro Ukai's work, but also the general context of Atelier Yamanami and its daily struggle for tolerance and inclusivity, its ability to empower artists and foster unbridled creativity, as well as the inventiveness of Ukai's experimentations in shapes, colors, iconographic quotations, and dynamic compositional principles, offer the ingredients of a fascinating human story. I am looking forward to the many surprises that Ukai undoubtedly has in store for us as his work further evolves in new yet unforeseeable directions. And I'll just show some more of the manga characters that were lurking in this poem. There's always more, and some bibliography. And thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much.